When you meet someone online, can you trust they are who they say they are?
Good evening, my love.
It's all well planned.
She was trying to get me to send her money.
Love Janessa is a true crime podcast from the BBC World Service and CBC Podcasts, exploring the world of online romance scams. And it's available now. Find it wherever you found this podcast.
Thanks for downloading the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service with me, Laura Jones. In this episode, we're going back to the moment which changed the way we listen to music, the invention of the MP3. It's 1998, and the BBC's music TV show Inside Tracks is reporting on a music revolution where you can download your favourite songs to your computer for the first time.
You're still clinging to the past then with old-fashioned compact disc, eh? Because, of course, anyone who knows anything about the future will tell you that soon your CD collection will be obsolete. Obsolete in a world where every song ever recorded is available to you on tap rather than on tape.
And Karl-Heinz Brandenburg from Germany has just realised his MP3 technology has made it big.
I was visiting Hong Kong and I looked into the display of an electronics store and they had 30 different kinds of MP3 players there. And then I thought, okay, we've done it. Nobody can stop it again.
It took years and years to get to the point of being able to push a button and play a song on an MP3 player. It was 1982 when Karl-Heinz was first set the challenge of cutting down the size of music files so they could be sent easily between computers. He'd just finished his degrees in engineering and maths at Friedrich Alexander University in Erlangen, Nuremberg. And back then, music was more of a physical thing.
At that time, on radio mostly, and then still on cassette tape or tape, really. I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder as well. I was always listening to classical music, not opera, but everything else. In terms of pop music, I liked folk rock and some of the classics like the Beatles. I was interested in music my whole life. Earlier on, I played some instruments, so I thought, okay, let's try this. Perhaps it works, and anyway, I will get a PhD degree and then go on to industry and do something for real.
Little did he know then that this area of research would take over his career for decades, and he'd work in both the US and Germany perfecting the technology. This BBC archive explains the end result Karl-Heinz's team was aiming for.
A means of compression whereby a vast amount of data, whether it be audio data or whatever, can be compressed and transferred easily and quickly across the internet.
So the music files had to be made smaller. The challenge was to use computers to strip away bits that we can't always hear, but still make those compressed files sound as close as possible to the original.
In the beginning, it was just a normal lab with a big computer in there and some headphones connected. The first idea was to use some technology which had been around, and we tried how that would sound. And in fact, it sounded better than expected for most music, but not for all. For some music, it sounded terrible.
But they had a good starting point. Karl-Heinz and the team settled in for the long haul, trying different ways of coding. Some of their colleagues weren't convinced by their early research, though.
From people in professional audio, we got some clear advice which said, no, this will never work. And in fact, we demoed it to some people and they said, okay, come back if it's good enough for the golden ears, but we don't think it will work.
By golden ears, Karl-Heinz means the gold standard of listening. Your favourite song should sound as good as it does on CD. To make sure the sound was right for the golden ears, a lot of music had to be bought and tested. So Karl-Heinz went shopping, with cash worth nearly $400 at the time.
I went to a local record store and told them, I want to buy compact discs. I have 1,000 D-Mark for that. And please, very different kinds of music. Some samplers, some classical concerts, some pop music, just different types of music. And then it was listening to it and finding out what would be most difficult So we had 20-second pieces we listened to, and then within these 20 seconds, it was intense listening to find out what's wrong, and then look at some measurement results, and then go back to the code and rewriting the code to hopefully avoid this problem.
They were testing everything from classical music.
Vivaldi was one of the easier pieces, in fact. Even there, it was not to listen to the loud parts of the signal, but to the very quiet passages, and to find out whether something went wrong there, whether the noise on the recording was okay.
Through to pop music like the Beach Boys, which was actually one of the easiest pieces the team tested.
For the good vibrations, I don't remember that piece. And it means it was not very difficult either.
So that was one of the very easy tracks, but some sounds were much more difficult to compress digitally.
Castanets, we never got to work right with MP3 because of some political compromises, and it was only much later that we set the parameters right and learned some new tricks to really make the castanets sound clean as they should.
Karl-Heinz and his team were making breakthrough after breakthrough until they were pretty happy with the technology they'd developed at Fraunhofer Labs. That is, until this song was tested, an a cappella track just featuring one voice.
I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the corner.
It's Tom's Diner by Suzanne Vega.
It was not part of the original music I bought at the record store. I had read that this item had been used to test home stereos and so on. And I found that somebody at Fraunhofer had bought the CD, and I said, okay, let's try it. So we got it into the computer. And then I let the algorithm, which worked fine for basically everything else. And Suzanne Vega's voice was actually destroyed. So yes, I had a new worst case item.
That song kicked off another few years of work for Karl-Heinz, and then the real test came years later when Suzanne actually heard the distorted version of her song. She spoke to the BBC in 2010.
It sounded like The Exorcist. It sounded like just monstrous. So they thought, oh, well, that's not finished. And they kept running Tom's Diner through the MP3 for months. They feel that the MP3 recreates the vocal sound perfectly. And I think there are people who would argue with that an MP3 has more compression, a higher end, not so much low end, not as warm. But don't tell them that.
And I'm turning to the horoscope and looking for the funnies.
It took until July 1995 for Karl-Heinz and the team to be satisfied with the sound of their creation.
The file format had been stable already for nearly 3 years at that point in time, but that was the 14th of July in 1995 when we said, okay, from now on we will use the file extension MP3. And others started to call the whole system MP3. And at some point we said, okay, no, it's not MPEG audio layer 3, but let's call it MP3.
And from that point, they had a success on their hands.
It's claimed this new technology will change the way in which music media, including recording, publishing and broadcasting, are distributed. So, is this the beginning of the end for the CD and the dawn of a brave new world where all our top tunes come straight from a terminal?
The answer to that is the MP3 has definitely changed the music industry. It made the file sharing boom of the late 90s possible and resulted in the introduction of MP3 players, all of which paved the way for the digital world of music we're in now. Professor Karl-Heinz Brandenburg still works in sound research at Brandenburg Labs in Ilmenau, Germany. He was speaking to me, Laura Jones, for that edition of the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service.
Hi, I'm Kim Chakaneta, host of The Comb from the BBC World Service.
This is The Comb.
The Comb.
The Comb.
And we are back for a new series, seeking out more stories and voices from across Africa that otherwise might go unheard.
When I strip off all the colonial cultures, all the colonial legacies that have been inherited, who am I?
It is very precarious, in the camp, where you see that your life is very uncertain.
Each week we focus on a single African story, as told by the people living it.
I'm still scared every year when there's fireworks. It just takes me right back to the war in Mogadishu.
A young person who is disconnected from her culture, from her identity.
Children do access your content, they do listen, they follow what you say, so you are part of the problem and you need to be part of the solution.
That's The Comb from the BBC World Service.
The Comb.
Find it wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
When you meet someone online, can you trust they are who they say they are?
Good evening, my love.
It's all well planned.
She was trying to get me to send her money.
Love Janessa is a true crime podcast from the BBC World Service and CBC Podcasts, exploring the world of online romance scams. And it's available now. Find it wherever you found this podcast.